The euro viral contagion is taking place right now. It never stopped back in the crisis of 2008. Here today, we are showing you how these cracks have appeared and things are beginning to crumble. The 25 banks that failed the stress test. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. 25 Eurozone banks fail the ECB stress test. This information is out of the AFP, and I will describe to you how exactly these tests work and what they have done. Let's get into the article where they said nearly 1 in 5 of the 130 banks surveyed failed the stress test. And why, first of all, did they choose these 130? Well, now that's a different discussion, but essentially they're not choosing all of the banks. If they were to have chosen all of these banks, they would have to disclose their derivatives books. But of course they don't get into that information because then every single one of them would be a failure. They do not do that. They selectively choose which ones they need to have showing up as a failure, because then they're going to get a bailout. These are the banks that if they say that they're stressed out, money is going to be handed their way, or they will need to be bought up by a bigger company who has their eyes on that other company. So you can go in to the article for yourself, but it says the failing banks were thought to be in Ireland, Greece, and Austria, and will have until November 10th to fill in the capital shortfalls, the paper reported. They're all failures. Let's go into this. The Italian banks apparently fared the worst, and that is a big problem because they have a lot of debt in the country of Italy. The ECB's health check showed banks in President Mario Draghi's home country of Italy are in particular need of more funds as they cope with the bad loans and the nation's third recession since 2008. That's an extreme amount when you have a triple dip recession and they're not going to be able to grow out of it. And something that I've brought up before is the fact that they're able to use illegal activity like drugs and prostitution to improve their GDP statistics. That's when you know that the country is in trouble, when they're using these type of games to manipulate their numbers. It's something that is very, very obvious, very clear, because they've made that information public. And then they said that they're confident they're going to get out of everything. Have no fear. Everything is just fine. Go back to sleep. The 25 most stressed banks in Europe. I'll read you the first line. It says, to pass the ECB's adverse stress test, banks must show their ratio of core capital to risk-weighted assets can remain above 5.5% over 3 years after a hypothetical recession and a bond market collapse. Of course, these numbers are not real because their whole underlying fundamentals are not real. You can't do a proper stress test if you're going to leave out certain select information. It can't be done. But for the time being, at least they showed that some of these banks are in fact going to fail when the collapse occurs. So this here, I'll just scroll through just to give you an idea of what type of banks you have. Cyprus, Greece, Italy, Cyprus, Ireland, Cyprus, again, Austria, Italy, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Belgium, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of these Eurozone countries that are really in trouble right now, and piling on more debt and imposing more austerity measures on the individual citizen is not going to fix it, because they've already tried this and it hasn't been successful. Out of the BBC, EU budget anger. UK is not alone. And what I'm trying to just point out with this is that the UK said that they are not going to be able to get the money in time, and it's going to be a struggle, but they'll do it. But we wanted to know these facts later on, and they're basically taking the money from these countries, from these technocrats sitting up on top, are deciding that they need to siphon more money from certain countries, and they say, no, you owe tax, okay, now we're going to give money to you, Germany, and so on and so forth. It's pretty aggravating to see that these technocrats from different countries that offer no allegiance to that specific country are then stealing money from there, siphoning it off, and handing it off to a different country. It's something that absolutely cannot make things work. The wealth tax, a tax on the rich that cripples the poor. Isn't that quite obvious? Isn't that something that's been happening over the recent years when we see the financial crisis, the bailouts taking money from the individual and piling it into the hands of the elite? This information is out of the Telegraph in our series of how France is suffering under the president here, socialist government. Andrew Gilligan looks at how the wealth tax, also favored by Ed Miliband, is hurting peasant farmers and those on the middle incomes. Now, wait a second. Peasant farmers, it says it's a rich tax. So let's go into what it said here. It said, found them, these individual couple, they're quite in poverty here, and it says they found themselves classified as wealthy and liable for vast bills under the country's version of the mansion tax. France is extremely socialist in this regard here. They had the 75% tax, and that wasn't enough. They needed to impose a 100% tax rate on certain select individuals. And that's how you know that they are getting desperate. They want to push down the rich, and what's going to happen is a mass exodus of those rich people, moving out all of their assets out of the country. It's going to make them more poor. But isn't that exactly what they want? They want the country to be poor so that the rich, the super rich, can go in and buy their villas and buy all of the assets up and get them for pennies on the dollar. In my book, I talked about this. Although the officials' numbers may vary, the unfunded liabilities, this is in the US, amount to over $60 trillion according to USA Today. And then, of course, I said that depending on your calculations, it could be higher. And I've seen much higher statistics than that, but let's go with the $60 trillion. You're looking at something that can't be paid back. That is essentially the GDP of the entire world when you're including these unfunded liabilities like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And that's why I say that when they create these stress tests, they're not going in with the real figures, the real statistics. So even though they showed us 1 in 5 banks failing, it doesn't really make a difference because they are all a failure. They put their derivatives off the balance sheet and they look better as a result.